All right, thanking God again, this time for another perspective on discouragement in times that can seem to be super discouraging. Let's actually call this chapter, You Have Encouraged the Wicked, understanding that there are two groups of people in Judah that have risen to prominence, encouraging the wicked in various ways. First of all, the prophets, once again, and this time, what's going to be described are those who are going to be described as the daughters, presumably, of Israel. In this chapter that seems to break down in roughly 4 sections, really 2 halves that each have 2 sections. The first section going against the prophets of Israel from verses 1 through 7, breaking down from there to, let's call it a therefore statement in verses 8 through 16. Then the next half of the chapter breaking down into that prophecy against the daughters, as he's going to say, of your people, breaking down from verses 17 through 19, then changing from verses 20 through the end of the chapter to the therefore against them. But let's look at those verses a little bit more closely as the chapter begins in verse 1. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the prophets of Israel who are prophesying, and say to those who prophesy from their own hearts, hear the word of the Lord, as he will go on to call them in verse 3, foolish prophets, following their own spirits. Down to verse 5, saying, they have not gone up into the breaches or built a wall for the house of Israel, that it might stand in battle in the day of the Lord. Verse 6, therefore, not even therefore, the therefore is later, sorry. They have seen false visions and lying divinations, declares the Lord, who has not sent them. But he's going to say they still expect him to fulfill their word, basically prophesying out of their own minds. The therefore comes in verse 8, where he says, therefore he is against them, recurring or bringing back a recurring theme that we have seen, where it gets to a certain point where God is not simply sitting there as a passive observer of the wrong that is being done, being patient, showing grace for their grace period, but now he is turning to actually function as what seems to be their enemy, giving us a little bit more detail as to why he is turning. As he is going to say, let's skip down to verse 10, precisely because they have misled my people, saying, peace when there is no peace. And because when the people build a wall, these prophets smear it with whitewash. The way in which they are encouraging the wicked, the prophets are encouraging the wicked, is allowing them to build their own belief system or their own agenda and saying, you're going to be okay. Basically because they said so. Once again, regardless of their integrity, the thing that still matters to God. God, however, is going to destroy the wall or the agenda that they have built, and his judgment on the prophets is going to be causing them to perish in the destruction of the agenda that God is going to deal with, thinking they can make a thing holy simply because they said so. A delusion that God is about to break down and destroy. Understanding that the second half of the chapter, going from verses 17 on through, what we call it, 23, it's going to be broken down in another 2 halves. Verses 17 through 19, talking about the daughters of the people, where it reads in verse 17, and you, son of man, set your face against the daughters of your people who prophesy out of their own minds. Prophesy against them and say, thus says the Lord. Woe to the women who sew magic bands upon their wrists upon all wrists, and make veils for the heads of every person of every stature in the hunt for souls. Will you hunt down souls belonging to my people and keep your own souls alive? The seemingly rhetorical question that he will go on to answer in the rest of the chapter, giving us a deeper insight into the problems that the false prophets are causing the people. Essentially, as we've titled the chapter or entitled the chapter, disheartening the righteous while encouraging the wicked. As verse 19 will say, you have profaned me among my people for handfuls of barley and for pieces of bread, putting to death souls who should not die, and keeping alive souls who should not live, by your lying to my people who listen to lies. The therefore coming in verse 20, where he says, therefore thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against your magic bands with which you hunt the souls like birds, and I will tear them from your arms, and I will let the souls whom you hunt go free, the souls like birds. Skipping down to the end of the chapter in verses 22 and 23, which give us a because statement. It's going to say, because you have disheartened the righteous falsely, although I have not grieved him, and you have encouraged the wicked, that he should not turn from his evil way to save his life. Therefore, you shall no more see false visions, nor practice divination. I will deliver my people out of your hand, and you shall know that I am the Lord. The chapter concludes. The thing that most caught my attention, quite possibly going back to the chosen title, verse 22. You have disheartened the righteous falsely, although I have not grieved him, and you have encouraged the wicked. In two ways I saw in this chapter, they seem to encourage the wicked. First of all, with the false prophets in the first half of the chapter, as we said, they allowed the people to build their own agenda, endorsing it, simply going along to get along, even though they were supposed to receive a word from the Lord. They looked at what the people had built, and from their own hearts, they simply said, seems good to me. However, as we saw in the first half of the chapter, God was going to do a kind of 2-for-1. He was going to destroy the fiction or the agenda and the false prophets along with the agenda, all seemingly maybe in one motion, we'll call it. However, with the daughters of the people of Israel, they seem to be promoting their own agenda, basically endorsing the wicked, basically whoever they chose to endorse, regardless, once again, of integrity. Taking the same theme as the false prophets, just a different approach. They were a little bit more proactive, I guess, in promoting their agenda because they set the agenda. They didn't simply endorse an agenda that the people had chosen, reminding me, at least in some ways, of the days of Jezebel in the kingdom of Ahab and Jezebel. Even though Ahab was the figurehead, Jezebel was the power behind the evil in Israel at that time. And it seems that the daughters of Judah have now decentralized that same basic playbook, meaning they're taking the power of Jezebel and diffusing it amongst a larger group of women who have gained control or influence in Israel, even control or influence over life and death. In much the same way, Jezebel wielded influence over life and death, even over the legitimate prophets of Israel back in her day. Understanding all of that, as we sometimes say, I guess my prayer for you is my prayer for me. In these days especially, may God not only give us a heart to seek to do righteousness, or quite simply stated, just to do right, may he give us the courage to resist everything that makes it difficult to do right in these days. And moreover, may he make a strong demonstration of the way he delivers us from those who would rather encourage the wicked.